letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 3 days before our eviction. It offered an impossible lifeline, a sprawling, fully paid-off estate left by a great-aunt I barely knew existed. But if I had known what was waiting behind the heavy steel door in its basement, I would have taken my 12-year-old daughter and happily slept in my car. 3 weeks earlier, my life looked nothing like the desperate flight through dark Appalachian woods that it would become. 3 weeks earlier, I was simply a woman trying to survive one more day in a city that had already chewed me up and spit me out. Poverty does not announce itself with a dramatic crash. It creeps in like black mold spreading through the walls of your life until one day you realize the structure is rotting from the inside. For me, it started when my husband Garrett walked out on us 8 months ago, leaving behind a mountain of gambling debts secretly taken out against our joint accounts. Credit cards I never knew existed. Personal loans with my forged signature. A second mortgage on our apartment that I only discovered when the bank sent the foreclosure notice. By the time the dust settled, my daughter Willa and I were drowning in debt that was not even ours. I was working double shifts at a diner in downtown Chicago, coming home at 2 a.m. with feet that felt like blocks of concrete, only to lie awake staring at a stack of bills I could not afford to pay. The numbers never changed. The interest kept climbing, and every month we slipped a little further behind. Willa was 12 years old, an age where the world already feels inherently unfair, and watching her mother crumble under financial pressure was breaking something inside her that I could not fix. She stopped talking about school, stopped mentioning her friends. She would sit on her bed with earbuds shoved in her ears, staring at the wall. And I knew she was listening to me cry in the kitchen at night when I thought she was asleep. When the bright pink eviction notice was finally taped to our apartment door, I felt a strange hollow numbness settle over me like a burial shroud. I had fought so hard. I had worked until my body screamed for rest. And none of it had mattered. I had failed. Then came the certified letter from the law offices of Whitmore and Associates. I remember staring at the envelope for a long time before opening it. My name was typed in formal black letters. The return address was from somewhere in Pennsylvania, a state I had no connection to whatsoever. My first thought was that it must be another collection agency, another creditor I did not know about, another piece of Garrett's wreckage coming back to haunt me. But when I tore open the envelope and unfolded the crisp white paper inside, the words made no sense. "Dear Ms. Colton," it read, "we regret to inform you of the passing of Margaret Holloway. As her sole surviving blood relative, you have been named the primary beneficiary of her estate. Please contact our offices at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of assets." I read the letter 3 times. Then I read it again. Margaret Holloway. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard of any Margaret in my family. My mother, Patricia, had been an only child, and her parents had died before I was born. There were no aunts, no uncles, no mysterious relatives waiting in the wings. Our family tree had exactly 2 branches, and one of them had already been cut down when my mother passed away from cancer 5 years ago. I called the number on the letterhead the next morning. The man who answered identified himself as Harold Whitmore, senior partner at the firm. His voice was measured and professional, carrying the particular cadence of someone who had delivered this kind of news many times before. "Ms. Colton, thank you for calling. I understand this must come as quite a shock." "There has to be some mistake," I said, pressing the phone against my ear while Willa ate cereal at the kitchen table, watching me with curious eyes. "I don't have any relatives named Margaret Holloway. I don't have any relatives at all. I assure you there is no mistake." Whitmore's voice remained calm, almost soothing. "Margaret Holloway was your mother's aunt, her father's sister to be precise. She left Chicago in the late 1980s and severed all ties with the family. It was her explicit wish that no contact be made during her lifetime. But upon her death, her instructions were very clear. Everything she owned was to go to you. I sank into a kitchen chair, my mind racing. A great aunt. A great aunt I had never known existed, who had apparently been watching from a distance my entire life. What exactly did she leave me? A property in the rural town of Oak Haven, Pennsylvania. The house is fully paid off. The taxes are covered in perpetuity through a private trust. There are some personal effects as well, furniture and such. It is yours, Ms. Colton, free and clear. I closed my eyes. A free house arriving 3 days before we were scheduled to be thrown out on the street. It felt like a miracle. It felt like divine intervention. It felt, though I did not recognize it at the time, like bait. 2 days later, I sat in Harold Whitmore's suffocatingly warm mahogany-paneled office in downtown Philadelphia. He was an older man, perhaps 70, with wire-rimmed glasses and a persistent cough that punctuated every other sentence. The office smelled of old paper and lemon furniture polish, and the afternoon sun slanted through dusty blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his desk. He slid a thick manila folder toward me, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. Your great-aunt Margaret passed away 3 weeks ago from pancreatic cancer. She was a recluse, Ms. Colton. To my knowledge, she had no friends, no social connections, and no visitors in the 20 years I served as her attorney. You are her only surviving blood relative. She has left you her entire estate, which consists primarily of the property in Oak Haven. I opened the folder and stared at the deed. The paper was heavy official, covered in legal language I did not understand, but my name was there typed clearly in the section marked Beneficiary, Meredith Colton. Why me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She never contacted me, not once in my entire life. Why would she leave everything to someone she never even met? Whitmore removed his glasses and polished them slowly with a silk handkerchief. I could not say. Margaret was a private woman with private reasons, but I would tell you this much. She was aware of your situation, your financial difficulties, your impending eviction. He paused, letting the words settle. She employed a private investigator to keep track of your circumstances. She knew exactly what you were facing when she made her final arrangements. A chill ran down my spine. A woman I had never met had been watching me, tracking the slow-motion collapse of my life, waiting for the perfect moment to intervene. Given your current standing, Whitmore continued, I strongly suggest you accept the inheritance. The house is habitable if somewhat outdated. It would provide you and your daughter with a stable living situation while you sort out your finances. I looked down at the deed again. 42 Blackwood Lane, Oak Haven, Pennsylvania. It was not really a choice. We had nowhere else to go. We packed everything we owned into my beat-up 2008 Honda Civic and left Chicago behind on a gray October morning. The car's engine made a concerning rattling sound whenever I pushed it above 60 miles per hour, and the heater only worked intermittently, but it was the last thing we owned that the creditors had not taken. Willa sat in the passenger seat with her knees pulled up to her chest, earbuds shoved in her ears, her face turned toward the window. She had barely spoken since I told her we were moving. 12 years old, ripped away from her school. Her friends, everything familiar, all because of choices made by adults she could not control. I knew she blamed me. Part of me did not blame her for blaming me. We drove in silence through Indiana, then Ohio, the flat gray landscape bleeding past like a fever dream. When we finally crossed the Pennsylvania state line, Willa pulled one earbud out and spoke for the first time in hours. Is the house going to be gross? I glanced at her, trying to read her expression. Her jaw was set in that particular way 12-year-olds have when they're trying to appear tougher than they feel. I don't know, honey, but it's going to be ours. No more landlords, no more eviction notices, just us. Is there going to be internet? I'll make sure there's internet. She nodded slowly, processing this information, then shoved the earbud back in and returned her gaze to the window. Oakhaven was one of those forgotten Appalachian towns where the economy had died decades ago, and no one had bothered to bury the corpse. The main street was a stretch of faded brick buildings, half of which were boarded up with plywood that had grayed and warped with age. A single traffic light blinked yellow over an empty intersection. A diner with a flickering neon sign advertised coffee for 99 cents. An old man in a trucker cap sat on a bench outside the post office, watching our car pass with the suspicious gaze of someone who had not seen a stranger in months. We followed the directions Whitmore had provided up a winding potholed road that led away from the town center into the dense fog-choked woods that surrounded Oakhaven like a shroud. The trees pressed close on either side, their bare branches reaching toward the gray sky like skeletal fingers. The fog grew thicker the higher we climbed until I could barely see 50 feet ahead. When we finally pulled up to the property, my heart sank. The house at 42 Blackwood Lane was a towering 3-story Victorian monstrosity that looked less like a home and more like a decaying tooth jutting out of the earth. The paint, once a pristine white, had peeled away in gray disease strips, revealing rotting wood beneath. Overgrown ivy choked the front porch, crawling up the columns and strangling the railings. The windows were dark and unwelcoming, their glass clouded with decades of grime. The yard was a wilderness of dead grass and twisted brambles. A rusted iron fence surrounded the property, its gate hanging open on broken hinges. Beyond the house, the forest pressed close, dark and impenetrable. Willa leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide. "Mom," she whispered, "it looks haunted. I'm not sleeping in there. It's just old honey. It just needs some love." The words sounded hollow even as I said them. The house did not look like it needed love. It looked like it needed an exorcism. I killed the engine and sat for a moment staring at the structure that was now supposedly mine. Margaret Holloway had lived here for over 30 years alone in this decaying mansion in the middle of nowhere. What kind of person chose this? What kind of person built a life in a place like this? We got out of the car. The autumn air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of rotting leaves and something else, something metallic and strange that I could not identify. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, just the soft whisper of wind through the bare branches. I walked up the cracked stone path to the front porch, the boards groaning under my weight. The front door was solid oak, weathered but sturdy, with a heavy brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. I pulled the key Whitmore had given me from my pocket and inserted it into the lock. The tumblers turned with a grinding resistance, as if the house itself was reluctant to let us in. I pushed the door open, and the hinges screamed in protest, the sound echoing through the empty space beyond. The air inside was thick, smelling of mothballs, dried lavender, and decades of stagnant dust. Sheets covered the furniture like ghosts, frozen in mid-movement, their shapes suggesting chairs and tables and sofas beneath. The floorboards groaned under our weight as we stepped inside, each footstep raising small clouds of dust that swirled in the pale light filtering through the grimy windows. It was cold. Colder inside than it was outside in the autumn air. "This place is creepy," Willa said, her voice small. "It's just been empty for a while. We'll clean it up. It'll feel like home in no time." I did not believe the words even as I spoke them. But what choice did we have? We spent the first few days simply trying to make the house habitable. I scrubbed floors that had not seen a mop in years, the dirty water turning black almost immediately. We ripped the dusty sheets off heavy antique furniture, coughing and sneezing as clouds of particulate matter filled the air. We opened every window we could, letting the cold autumn breeze sweep through the rooms and carry away some of the suffocating smell of the past. Margaret Holloway, it seemed, had been a woman of considerable wealth, but bizarre habits. The house was filled with expensive things. Persian rugs that must have cost thousands of dollars lay beneath layers of dust. Silver tea sets sat tarnished but intact in glass cabinets. Oil paintings in gilded frames hung on every wall depicting pastoral scenes and stormy seascapes. The furniture was all antique heavy oak and mahogany pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. But there were no photographs. Not a single picture of Margaret or anyone else adorned the walls or sat on the mantels. No family portraits, no vacation snapshots, no wedding pictures or birthday celebrations. The woman who had lived here for 30 years had left no visual evidence of her existence whatsoever. It was Willa who noticed it first. "Mom, look at this," she said on our second evening, standing in the parlor with her arms crossed. "No pictures anywhere, not even in the bedrooms. It's like she didn't exist." I looked around, realizing she was right. I had been so focused on cleaning and organizing that I had not registered the absence, but now that Willa pointed it out, it was impossible to ignore. Every house I had ever been in had photographs, family pictures, personal memories captured and displayed. It was such a fundamental part of how people lived that its absence felt deeply wrong. "Maybe she was just private," I offered weakly. "Private people still have pictures, they just don't show them to visitors." Willa shook her head. "This is different. This is like she was hiding." I didn't have a response to that. But the strangest thing about the house was not the lack of photographs. It was the door. The door sat tucked beneath the grand sweeping staircase that dominated the central hallway. Unlike the ornate glass-knobbed doors throughout the rest of the house, this door was solid, heavy steel, painted a dull gray that blended with the surrounding woodwork. If you were not looking for it, you might walk past it a dozen times without noticing. But once you saw it, you could not unsee it. It looked like a door you would find on a bank vault or a panic room. It had no keyhole, only a modern high-grade biometric keypad lock and a heavy deadbolt. The steel was thick enough that when I knocked on it, my knuckles made almost no sound. "What's in there?" Willa asked on our third night, pointing a flashlight at the door. The power had gone out for a few hours due to a passing storm, and we were navigating the dark house with flashlights and candles. "Probably just the basement," I said, trying to sound casual. "Or maybe a utility closet for the electrical panel." I reached out and tugged at the handle. It didn't budge, not even a millimeter. "Why would a utility closet need a lock like that?" Willa asked, her voice carrying the particular edge of a child who knows when an adult is lying. I did not have an answer. I told myself that Margaret was just a paranoid old woman living alone in the woods. I told myself that eccentric people built eccentric houses, and a reinforced door was probably nothing more than an overreaction to rural isolation. But as the days bled into weeks, the door became an obsession. At night, when the house was dead silent and Willa was asleep in one of the smaller bedrooms upstairs, I would lie awake in Margaret's old master bedroom listening. The house made the sounds all old houses make, the settling of wooden beams, the creak of floorboards, the rattle of windows in their frames. But sometimes beneath those normal sounds, I swore I could hear something else. A low, rhythmic hum coming from somewhere below. It was not the sound of an old furnace or a water heater. It was too steady, too deliberate. It felt less like mechanical equipment and more like something alive breathing in the darkness beneath my feet. I began systematically searching the house, looking for anything that might explain the door or provide access to whatever lay beyond it. I went through Margaret's belongings methodically, opening every drawer, checking every closet, examining every piece of furniture for hidden compartments. Margaret had left behind a lifetime of accumulated objects, but almost no personal papers, no diaries, no letters, no address books or appointment calendars. It was as if she had sanitized her existence before dying, removing anything that might reveal who she truly was. By our third week in Oakhaven, the money I had scraped together from my last paycheck was almost gone. I needed to find a job in town, needed to start building some kind of life in this place we now reluctantly called home. But I could not tear myself away from the house. There was something here, something Margaret had hidden, something she had protected with steel doors and biometric locks and a lifetime of secrecy, and I needed to know what it was. I found the key entirely by accident. It was a Thursday afternoon, gray and drizzling, the kind of day where the sky seems to press down on you like a physical weight. Willa was at the middle school in town, her first week of classes at a new school where she knew no one and nothing. I had dropped her off that morning, watching her small figure disappear through the front doors with her shoulders hunched and her head down, and the guilt had been almost unbearable. To distract myself, I decided to deep clean the master bathroom. It was a sprawling space with a clawfoot tub, vintage hexagonal tile, and a heavy mahogany vanity that looked like it had been there since the house was built. The drawers were stuck with age and humidity, requiring significant force to open. I was trying to unstick the bottom drawer, yanking on the brass handles with both hands, when something gave way suddenly, and the entire drawer came flying out of the cabinet. I stumbled backward, the drawer crashing to the floor, spilling old cosmetics and hairpins and bottles of dried-up perfume across the tile. I cursed under my breath and knelt to clean up the mess. That was when I saw it. In the dusty cavity of the cabinet where the drawer had been resting against the back panel was a small velvet-lined box. It had been hidden, deliberately placed in a location where no one would find it unless they removed the drawer entirely. My hands trembled as I reached in and pulled out the box. It was heavier than it looked, the velvet worn smooth with age. There was no lock, just a small brass clasp holding it closed. I pried it open with my fingernails. Inside, resting on a bed of faded red silk, was a key unlike any I had ever seen. It was cylindrical, made of brushed steel, with a series of small dimples cut into its surface in a precise pattern. A high-security dimple key, the kind used for commercial safes in government buildings. Beneath the key was a small piece of parchment paper yellowed with age. 6 digits were written on the paper in faded blue ink. 41,989. I stared at the numbers, my breath catching in my throat. April 19th, 1989, my birthday. The room seemed to tilt around me. I grabbed the edge of the vanity to steady myself, my mind racing through implications I could not fully process. Why would my estranged great-aunt, a woman who had never sent a birthday card or acknowledged my existence in any way, use my birth date as the passcode to her most secure vault? How did she even know my birthday? The questions spiraled through my head as I stood in that dusty bathroom holding a key and a scrap of paper that suddenly felt like the most important objects in the world. Willa was at school. The house was utterly silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the parlor downstairs. I walked downstairs slowly, the key heavy in my palm, the parchment paper clutched in my other hand. Each step felt deliberate, weighted with significance I did not yet understand. The steel door waited for me beneath the stairs. I stood before it for a long moment, my heart pounding against my ribs. Everything in my body was telling me to stop, to put the key back where I found it, to pretend I had never discovered any of this. But I had spent 3 weeks staring at this door, 3 weeks wondering what was behind it, 3 weeks listening to that low, rhythmic hum in the darkness and telling myself I was imagining things. I was not going to walk away now. I punched the numbers into the keypad. 041989. The keypad beeped a small green light illuminating beside the display. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed from inside the door as the electronic lock disengaged. I inserted the dimple key into the manual deadbolt and turned it. It slid back with a sickeningly smooth click, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. I gripped the cold steel handle and pulled. The door hissed, breaking a vacuum seal I had not expected, and swung open outward with surprising ease for something so massive. A rush of cold air washed over me, not the damp, musty air of a normal basement. This air was perfectly climate-controlled, carrying a sterile smell that reminded me of hospitals or museum archives. I reached inside, feeling along the wall for a light switch. My fingers found a panel of switches, and I flipped them all. Fluorescent lights flickered to life overhead, buzzing softly as they illuminated a staircase that descended much deeper than any normal basement should. The walls of the stairwell were lined with thick, soundproofing foam, the kind you see in recording studios or military installations. The stairs themselves were rubberized, designed to muffle footsteps. This was not a root cellar. This was a bunker. I descended slowly, my sneakers making almost no sound on the rubberized steps. The air grew colder as I went deeper, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow. The hum I had been hearing at night was louder here, a constant vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stepped into a room that defied everything I thought I knew about my family, about Margaret Holloway, about my own identity. The basement was massive, stretching the entire footprint of the house above. The ceiling was low, maybe 8 feet, supported by steel beams that gave the space the feeling of a submarine or an underground military command center. But it was what filled the space that made my blood run cold. On the left side of the room was an intricate, highly sophisticated surveillance station. 6 large black monitors sat dormant above a console covered in switches and dials. Beneath the monitors was a massive ham radio setup, complete with antennae arrays and frequency scanners. Police scanners sat beside it, along with what looked like server racks, still softly humming with power. It looked like the command center of a paranoid intelligence officer preparing for the end of the world. But it was the center of the room that drew me forward, my feet moving almost without my permission. There were 3 long stainless steel tables arranged in a row like something you would find in a morgue or a forensic laboratory. On the first table sat stacks of bound ledgers, hundreds of them meticulously labeled with dates spanning from the late 1980s to just a few months ago. Financial records, by the look of them, tracking money I could not begin to comprehend. On the second table were rows of transparent plastic bins. I walked over, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid of the first bin. It was full of passports, dozens of them, maybe 50 or more. United States passports, Canadian passports, British, German, French, Australian. I picked one up and flipped it open. The photograph inside showed a woman I recognized immediately. It was Margaret Holloway, looking perhaps 20 years younger, her gray hair still streaked with brown, her eyes sharp and alert. But the name printed beside the photograph was not Margaret Holloway. It said Eleanor Vance. I picked up another passport. Same face, different name. Cynthia Hughes, another, Margaret Thorne, another, Patricia Webb. I dropped the passports back into the bin, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. Margaret Holloway was not just a recluse, she was a ghost A woman who had lived under dozens of identities, changing names the way other people changed clothes. Who was she? What had she done that required this level of deception? I turned to the third table, and everything I thought I knew about my life came crashing down. The table was covered by a large corkboard laid flat, the kind investigators use to organize complex cases. Pinned to the board were yellowed newspaper clippings, official-looking documents, police reports, and faded photographs. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the materials. The first thing I saw was a newspaper clipping from the Chicago Tribune, dated April 22, 1989. The headline was printed in bold black letters that seemed to pulse with terrible significance. Local infant snatched from crib. Police baffled by disappearance of baby Olivia. I read the article, my vision narrowing to a tunnel focused only on the words in front of me. A 3-day-old infant named Olivia Carlisle had been taken from a maternity ward at a prestigious hospital in a wealthy Chicago suburb. The parents, Victor and Vivian Carlisle, were described as prominent figures in the defense contracting industry, offering a substantial reward for information leading to the recovery of their daughter. The case had gone cold within months. Beneath the newspaper clipping was a standard FBI missing person document. Age-progressed sketches of what the child might look like at various stages of life. 5 years old, 10 years old, 15. I stared at the sketch of the 5-year-old girl. Brown hair cut in a simple style. Wide brown eyes, a small nose, a distinctive birthmark below the left ear. The birthmark I had on my own neck. The face in the sketch was my face. I let out a choked, terrified gasp and stumbled backward, knocking over a rolling chair that crashed to the concrete floor with a metallic clatter. The girl in the sketch was me. I was not Meredith Colton. I was not Margaret Holloway's great niece. I was Olivia Carlisle, a baby stolen from her crib 36 years ago. My mother, the woman who had raised me, the woman who had cried at my high school graduation and held my hand when my marriage fell apart and died from cancer 5 years ago, was not my mother. My eyes darted frantically around the table, looking for more information, desperate to understand what I was seeing. There were forged birth certificates with my name on them, Meredith Colton, along with fake hospital records documenting a birth that had never happened. There were photographs of me as a child, 5 years old, 10 years old, 15, clearly taken from a distance without my knowledge. There were detailed handwritten logs of bank transfers between accounts held under Margaret's various aliases and an account in the name of Patricia Colton. The woman who raised me had been paid. She'd received a monthly stipend of $5,000 for 35 years to hide me, to pretend I was her daughter, to keep me safe from people who were looking for me. I sank to my knees on the cold concrete floor, unable to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. Everything I knew about myself was a lie. My name, my family, my entire history. All of it was constructed, fabricated, designed to hide me from something or someone. But who and why? The answers were somewhere in this room. I could feel them pressing against me, waiting to be discovered. But before I could begin to search for them, a sharp, piercing alarm shattered the silence of the bunker. The sound was deafening, a wailing siren that echoed off the concrete walls and filled the space with cacophonous noise. A red light began spinning above the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs, casting bloody shadows that swept across the room in rhythmic circles. Then, cutting through the alarm, a digitized automated voice spoke from hidden speakers. Perimeter breach, silent alarm activated, dispatching security protocol. My heart stopped. I had triggered something by opening the door, some kind of security system that Margaret had installed, a silent alarm that notified someone somewhere that the vault had been accessed, and whoever that someone was, they were coming. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the surveillance station, slamming my palms against the console. The 6 monitors were dark, but there had to be a way to turn them on to see what was happening outside. I found a master power switch and flipped it. The monitors hummed and flickered to life, bathing the bunker in an eerie blue glow. The cameras were high definition, covering every angle of the property. The driveway, the front porch, the interior hallways, the backyard. Camera 2 showed the driveway. My beat-up Honda Civic was still parked where I had left it this morning, but behind it, pulled up so close that it was almost touching my bumper, was a sleek black Audi SUV with heavily tinted windows. It had no license plates. My blood turned to ice. Camera 4 showed the interior hallway of the house, the space directly above where I was standing. A man was walking through the foyer. He was tall, well over 6 feet, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place in this decaying Victorian house. He wore black leather gloves and moved with a terrifying practiced fluidity, each step deliberate and controlled. In his right hand, held casually by his side, was a matte black handgun fitted with a suppressor. He was not a local police officer responding to an alarm. He was not a concerned neighbor checking on a disturbance. He was a professional, a cleaner, the kind of man corporations and governments send when they want a problem to disappear quietly. And he was making a beeline directly for the space beneath the stairs. He knew exactly what was here. I looked at the top of the basement stairs. The heavy steel door was still wide open, a rectangle of light beckoning from above. If he reached that door before I could close it, I was dead. A primal surge of adrenaline overtook my terror. I sprinted for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The alarm was still wailing, the red light still spinning, but I blocked it all out, focused only on reaching that door. I grabbed the cold steel handle and hauled the door toward me with every ounce of strength I possessed. It was heavier than I remembered, the steel thick and solid, and it moved with agonizing slowness. Through the narrowing gap, I saw the man step into the hallway. Our eyes met. His face was utterly expressionless, no surprise, no anger, no emotion of any kind. Just a cold, calculating assessment, the look of a predator evaluating its prey. He raised his weapon, the suppressor pointing directly at me. I yanked the door shut with a final desperate heave. A heavy metallic thud echoed through the bunker as the biometric locks engaged, automatically sealing me inside. A fraction of a second later, a muffled impact hit the other side of the steel. He had fired, but the bunker door was bulletproof, built to withstand exactly this kind of assault. I backed away from the door, trembling so violently I could barely stand. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I was safe, for now, but I was also trapped. I rushed back to the surveillance monitors, my eyes fixed on camera 4. The man, the cleaner, was examining the keypad beside the vault door. His expression remained calm, almost bored, as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black electronic device. He attached it to the biometric scanner with a suction cup, then pressed several buttons on its surface. A digital readout on the device began rapidly cycling through numbers. He was brute forcing the lock, running through every possible combination until he found the one that would open the door. I watched the numbers blur past on his device, and I knew I had minutes, maybe less. I had to find another way out. Margaret was a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for the worst. She had built a bunker beneath her house, installed military-grade security systems, maintained dozens of false identities. She would not have created a vault with only one exit. There had to be a back door. I began tearing through the basement, pulling away panels of soundproofing foam, moving heavy storage racks, searching every inch of the walls for any sign of a secondary exit. Behind a row of dormant computer servers, I found it. It was an old coal chute, the kind that had been standard in houses of this era, allowing delivery men to dump coal directly into the basement. But Margaret had retrofitted it, reinforcing the original brick structure with a steel grate secured by a heavy padlock. I dug frantically through my pockets, finding the dimple key I had used to open the vault door. I shoved it into the padlock. It turned. The padlock clicked open and I pulled it free, swinging the steel grate outward to reveal a narrow, dirt-packed tunnel reinforced with concrete piping. It sloped upward into darkness, a bolt hole, an escape route. Before diving into the tunnel, I turned back to look at the room, the ledgers, the passports, the corkboard covered in evidence of my true identity. I could not leave them. If the cleaner got his hands on them, I would have no proof of who I really was, no leverage, no way to understand the forces that had shaped my entire existence. I grabbed a heavy canvas duffel bag from a supply shelf and began frantically sweeping the contents of the table into it. The newspaper clippings, the forged birth certificates, Margaret's journals and ledgers, 3 of her fake passports. As I threw the last items into the bag, I noticed a heavy steel lockbox bolted beneath the table. I grabbed a large Maglite flashlight from the surveillance desk and smashed the butt of it against the box's latch. Once, twice, 3 times. The latch shattered. Inside were neat vacuum-sealed stacks of $100 bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars, Margaret's emergency fund. I threw as many stacks as I could fit into the duffel bag, zipped it shut, and slung it over my shoulder. On the monitors, the digital device attached to the vault door flashed green. The cleaner had cracked the code. He took a step back, raising his weapon, preparing to enter the bunker. I threw myself into the coal chute tunnel, just as the heavy mechanical clunk of the vault door disengaging echoed through the basement. The tunnel was suffocatingly tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and I had to crawl on my hands and knees with the heavy duffel bag dragging behind me. The walls were damp earth reinforced with crumbling concrete, and the smell was overwhelming: wet soil and decaying leaves, and the faint metallic tang of old pipes. Behind me, I heard the vault door swing open, then footsteps on the rubberized stairs. Then the calm, measured voice of the cleaner speaking to someone I could not see. "Asset is no longer in the primary hold. She has breached the secondary exit. I am in pursuit." I crawled faster, panic scraping at my throat, my knees and palms tearing against the rough ground. The tunnel sloped sharply upward, and I could feel the temperature changing, the air growing colder and fresher. The end had to be close. I hit a wooden hatch at the end of the tunnel and shoved upward with my shoulders. It resisted for a moment, then gave way with a crack of splintering wood and a shower of dead leaves and dirt. I dragged myself out into the biting autumn air, collapsing onto the damp forest floor. I was outside, maybe 50 yards behind the house, deep in the dense tree line that surrounded the property. Through the bare branches, I could see the black Audi parked in the driveway, blocking my Honda Civic. I could not drive away. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the duffel bag and ran blindly into the woods, heading in the direction I hoped was the county highway. Branches whipped at my face, tearing my skin, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Somewhere behind me, I heard the sound of someone emerging from the coal chute tunnel. The cleaner was following. I ran harder, my lungs burning, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. The forest was a maze of fallen trees and dense undergrowth, and I stumbled constantly, catching myself against rough bark that scraped my palms raw. I had to get to Willa. She was at school, innocent and unaware, waiting for me to pick her up at 3:15. If the cleaner knew about me, he might know about her too. I ran. The 2-mile sprint through the dense Appalachian woods tore my clothes and left me gasping for air, tasting copper in the back of my throat. When I finally broke through the tree line and tumbled down the muddy embankment onto County Road 9, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I staggered to my feet and looked back at the forest. No movement, no sign of pursuit, but I knew he was still coming. I flagged down the first vehicle that passed a battered pickup truck driven by an older farmer with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. He pulled over slowly, his gaze taking in my bleeding face, my torn clothes, my frantic demeanor. My car broke down. I gasped the lie coming automatically. I need to get to the middle school. Family emergency. Please. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and leaned over to unlock the passenger door. Get in. I climbed into the truck, clutching the duffel bag against my chest, and we drove toward town in silence. When we pulled up to Oak Haven Middle School, the final bell had just rung. Students were streaming out of the double doors, a chaos of backpacks and winter coats and teenage energy. I practically leaped out of the truck before it had fully stopped scanning the crowd desperately. Then I saw her, Willa, walking toward the bus loop, her earbuds in her eyes fixed on the ground, utterly oblivious. I sprinted toward her and grabbed her arm. She pulled out an earbud, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern as she took in my appearance. Mom, what happened to your face? Why are you covered in dirt? Where's the car? No questions, Willa. We have to go, right now. What, my stuff is at the house? My laptop, my books. Willa, I gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look into my eyes. If you do not come with me right now, we are both going to die. The raw desperation in my voice finally pierced her teenage armor. Her eyes went wide and she fell silent. She took my hand and together we walked away from the school, away from the only life we had known, and into an uncertain future defined by secrets I was only beginning to understand. We could not go to the local police. If a man in a tailored suit was walking around with a suppressed weapon in broad daylight, local cops would be worse than useless. They would ask questions, make calls, and file reports that would tell our pursuers exactly where to find us. And if the files in my duffel bag were real, the people looking for us had more power than any small-town sheriff could handle. So we walked. We walked along back roads and through patches of forest, avoiding the main highway until we reached a dusty, faded motel sitting off Interstate 83, towns over from Oak Haven. The sign out front advertised rooms for $49 a night. Half the letters in the neon sign were burned out. I paid for 2 nights in cash using a single $100 bill from Margaret's stash. The clerk, a bored young woman with purple hair and a nose ring, did not ask for identification. Once we were inside the dingy, smoke-stained room, I locked the deadbolt, chained the door, and pulled the blackout curtain shut. Willa sat on the edge of one of the beds, watching me with wide, frightened eyes. Mom, you need to tell me what's happening, right now. I looked at my daughter, my brave, stubborn, terrified daughter. She deserved the truth. But how do you tell a 12-year-old that everything she knows about her family is a lie? How do you explain that her mother is not who she thought she was, that her grandmother was paid to raise someone else's stolen child, that there are powerful people who want them both dead? I sat down on the bed across from her, the heavy duffel bag at my feet. I found something in the house, I said slowly. In the basement. Something that changes everything. Willa leaned forward, her fear temporarily overtaken by curiosity. What kind of something? I unzipped the duffel bag and began pulling out the contents. The newspaper clippings, the photographs, the forged documents, and the article from the Chicago Tribune dated April 1989, the article about a stolen baby named Olivia Carlisle. Willa read it slowly, her brow furrowing in confusion. I don't understand, she said. What does this have to do with us? I reached out and took her hand. That baby, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Olivia Carlyle. That's me, Willa. I'm the baby who was stolen. Willa stared at me. Then she looked down at the newspaper clipping again, then back at me. But Grandma, she said slowly. Grandma Patricia. She was your mom. She raised you. I've seen the pictures. Grandma Patricia was paid, I said, the words burning like acid in my throat. She was paid $5,000 a month for 35 years to pretend I was her daughter, to hide me from the people who were looking. Willa was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and fragile. Then who are you? I looked at my daughter, and for the first time in my life I had no answer. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm going to find out. The motel room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ancient heating unit and the distant rumble of trucks on the interstate. Somewhere out there, a man in a charcoal suit was hunting us. Somewhere out there, the truth about who I really was waited to be discovered. And somewhere out there, the people who had tried to steal me back were planning their next move. But for now, in this moment, we were alive. We were together. And we were going to fight. The motel room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaning solution, a combination that burned the back of my throat with every breath. The blackout curtains blocked most of the fading afternoon light, casting the space in a perpetual twilight that matched the darkness settling over my understanding of my own life. Willa had fallen asleep on one of the beds, exhausted by fear and confusion, her face still carrying the tear tracks from when she had finally allowed herself to cry. I had held her until her breathing slowed and her grip on my arm relaxed, then carefully extracted myself and moved to the cheap laminate desk beneath the window. The duffel bag sat open before me, its contents spread across the desk like evidence in a criminal investigation, which I supposed is exactly what they were. I started with Margaret's journals. There were 3 of them, leather-bound volumes with dates embossed in gold on their spines. The oldest began in 1987. The newest ended just 3 months ago, shortly before Margaret's death from pancreatic cancer. The handwriting was sharp and precise, the kind of penmanship they used to teach in schools decades ago. Each entry was dated, each page numbered, each piece of information recorded with the meticulous attention to detail of someone who understood that documentation might one day mean the difference between life and death. I opened the oldest journal first, turning to the earliest entries. October 14th, 1987. Accepted position as Director of Private Security and Risk Management for Carlyle Defense Industries. Salary substantial. Benefits comprehensive. Victor Carlyle personally conducted final interview. Impression, brilliant, ruthless, accustomed to absolute control. His wife Vivian present for portion of meeting. Impression, equally ruthless, but better at concealing it. This organization operates in gray areas I am familiar with from my previous government work. I understand what they need. I understand what they are willing to do to get it. I turned the pages, slowly reading entries that painted a picture of a world I had never known existed. Margaret Holloway had not been a simple recluse hiding in the Pennsylvania woods. Before Oakhaven, before her life of false identities and paranoid isolation, she had been something else entirely. The journals revealed that Margaret had spent 15 years working for various 3-letter government agencies, specializing in what she obliquely referred to as asset protection and threat neutralization. She never named the specific agencies, never provided details that could be verified, but the implication was clear. She had been a professional, a fixer, someone who made problems disappear for powerful people. and in 1987 she had been recruited by Victor Carlyle to do the same thing for his private defense contracting empire. The entries from her first 2 years at Carlyle Defense Industries were clinical professional. She documented security protocols, threat assessments, the occasional resolution of corporate espionage attempts by rival companies. She wrote about Victor and Vivian Carlyle with a detached respect, acknowledging their intelligence and ambition while maintaining professional distance. Then came the entries from late 1988, and everything changed. November 3, 1988. Theodore Carlyle, age 14, has been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, prognosis poor, conventional treatments failing. Victor has brought in specialists from Geneva oncologists who operate outside normal medical ethics boards. I have been instructed to ensure absolute secrecy regarding Theodore's condition and treatment. The boy is the sole heir to the Carlyle fortune. His death would be catastrophic for the family's legacy plans. November 17, 1988. Vivian is pregnant. This was not announced with joy. I was present when Victor informed the medical team. His exact words, "We need biological insurance. The new child will provide whatever Theodore requires." The doctors nodded as if this were perfectly normal. I said nothing. I'm paid to say nothing. December 8, 1988. Overheard conversation between Victor and lead geneticist from Swiss facility. They are not simply planning to use umbilical cord blood from the new baby. They are discussing tissue matching protocols, organ compatibility assessments, bone marrow harvesting schedules. The child Vivian is carrying is not intended to be a daughter. She is intended to be a living medical supply cabinet. Spare parts for Theodore. I stopped reading, my hands trembling so violently that the journal nearly slipped from my grasp. Spare parts. The words echoed in my skull like a death sentence delivered 36 years too late. I forced myself to continue. February 2, 1989. Vivian in 3rd trimester. Medical team has confirmed fetus is female and tissue compatible with Theodore. They have begun preparing surgical protocols for immediate umbilical cord blood harvest at birth, followed by bone marrow extraction procedures to begin when infant reaches minimum viable weight approximately 6 weeks post-delivery. Victor has authorized complete utilization if Theodore's condition deteriorates. When I asked for clarification on what complete utilization meant, I was told that all options remain on the table, including organ harvest. March 15, 1989. I have served powerful men for 20 years. I have done things that would horrify ordinary people. I have buried secrets that would topple governments. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself I was protecting something larger than individual lives. But this I cannot do. They are going to carve up a newborn baby to save a teenage boy. They are going to murder an infant one piece at a time, and they expect me to provide security for the procedure. I have begun making preparations. April 19, 1989. The baby was born today. A girl, 7 pounds 4 ounces, healthy, perfect. They named her Olivia, though I doubt they see her as a person deserving of a name. The cord blood was harvested immediately. It was not enough. Theodore's condition is deteriorating faster than expected. The medical team is pushing to accelerate the bone marrow extraction timeline. Victor has approved. The procedure is scheduled for next week. The baby will not survive it. They know this. They do not care. April 21, 1989. Tonight. It has to be tonight. I have arranged a power failure at the hospital that will disable security systems for 11 minutes. I've secured false identification documents in a safe house in Pennsylvania. I have contacted a woman in Chicago who recently suffered her 3rd miscarriage and whose marriage has just ended. She is desperate for a child. She will ask no questions if the price is right. I am taking the baby. I am taking Olivia. God forgive me for everything I have done in my life, but I will not let them butcher this child. I closed the journal and pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to block out the horror of what I had just read. My biological parents had created me to be harvested. I was never meant to be a daughter. I was never meant to have a life, a childhood, hopes and dreams, and a future. I was manufactured as a biological resource, a collection of compatible tissue to be carved up and transplanted into my brother piece by piece until there was nothing left. Margaret Holloway had not kidnapped me. She had saved my life. She had burned her entire existence to the ground, abandoned a lucrative career, spent 36 years living under false identities in constant fear of discovery, all to protect a baby she had no biological connection to from parents who saw that baby as nothing more than spare parts. I opened the second journal, my movements mechanical, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what I was learning. The entries from the years following my rescue documented Margaret's meticulous construction of a new life. She had established contact with Patricia Marsh, the woman who would become my mother, offering her $5,000 per month to raise me as her own daughter. Patricia had been told a carefully constructed lie about an orphaned relative and an anonymous benefactor, and she had accepted without asking too many questions. Margaret had monitored us from a distance using her intelligence training to track our lives without ever making direct contact. She documented my childhood milestones with the detached precision of a surveillance operative. First steps, first words, first day of school, piano recitals and soccer games and birthday parties, all observed from afar, all recorded in neat cursive handwriting. But she also documented the ongoing threat. The Carlyles had not given up. Theodore had died in 1991, despite receiving the umbilical cord blood that had been harvested from me at birth. But rather than accepting this loss, Victor and Vivian had become obsessed with finding the baby who had been stolen from them. Not out of parental love, out of rage, out of a refusal to accept that someone had defied them and escaped consequences. They had hired private investigators, forensic specialists, former intelligence operatives. They had offered massive rewards for information. They had pursued every lead, no matter how tenuous, for over 3 decades. And they had never stopped looking. June 12, 2003. Carlyle investigators getting closer. They have traced the money transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. I need to restructure the financial architecture. Patricia must never know the source of the funds. Olivia must never learn her true identity. If the Carlyles find them, they will not show mercy. Victor never forgives. Vivian never forgets. September 8, 2015. Patricia Marsh diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, prognosis terminal. I considered making contact, explaining everything, giving her the chance to tell Olivia the truth before the end. Decided against it. The risk is too great. Patricia will die believing the lie, and Olivia will continue living it. This is the safest outcome, the cruelest outcome, but the safest. March 3, 2023. My own diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, 6 months, perhaps less. I've been preparing for this moment for decades, but the reality is different from the planning. I need to ensure Olivia is protected after I'm gone. I need to ensure the Carlyles face justice for what they intended to do. I have begun implementing Protocol Omega. I flipped through the remaining pages searching for more information about this Protocol Omega, but the entries became sparse and cryptic, as if Margaret knew she was running out of time and could no longer afford the luxury of detailed documentation. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks before her death, October 14th, 2024. Everything is in place. The house has been prepared. The vault contains everything Olivia will need to understand and everything the authorities will need to prosecute. The dead man's switch is armed. When Olivia opens the vault, Protocol Omega will activate automatically. Every file, every ledger, every piece of evidence documenting the Carlyle's crimes will be transmitted simultaneously to the FBI, the SEC, the Department of Justice, and major news organizations. The house was always meant to be a trap. Olivia was always meant to be the trigger. I'm sorry to use her this way, but it is the only path to justice, the only way to ensure the Carlyles cannot bury this. The money in the lockbox should be enough for Olivia and her daughter to disappear while the storm breaks. Run, Olivia. Hide. And when the dust settles, know that I spent 36 years trying to give you the life your parents would have stolen. I hope it was enough. I set the journal down, my mind reeling. A dead man's switch. When I opened the vault door, I had not simply triggered a security alarm. I had activated a decades-long revenge plot, sending evidence of the Carlyle's crimes to every major law enforcement and media organization in the country. The man in the charcoal suit, the cleaner who had pursued me through the house, he was not just trying to silence me. He was trying to contain an information breach that might already be beyond containment. I looked at the television mounted on the motel room wall. It was old, a boxy CRT model that probably predated the Obama administration, but the remote was sitting on the nightstand beside Willa's bed. I grabbed it and turned on the TV, keeping the volume low to avoid waking my daughter. CNN was running a segment about economic policy. I flipped through channels until I found a local news station. Nothing about Carlyle Defense Industries, nothing about FBI raids or corporate scandals. But that did not mean anything. The protocol. Omega transmission had only been sent hours ago. It would take time for journalists to verify the information, for law enforcement to mobilize, for the story to break into public consciousness. The question was whether we could stay hidden long enough for that to happen. I turned off the television and returned to the contents of the duffel bag, searching for more information about my immediate situation. That was when I found the file on Garrett. It was a manila folder thinner than the others, tucked between two ledgers at the bottom of the bag. The label on the tab read, Asset Monitoring G. Colton, my ex-husband's name. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page was a photograph of Garrett taken from a distance, showing him entering a building I did not recognize. The second page was a dossier, the kind of document intelligence agencies compile on persons of interest. Name, Garrett James Colton, cover identity. Real name, Garrett James Whitfield. Date of birth, March 7th, 1985. Employment history, Carlyle Defense Industries, Special Projects Division, 2015 to present. Assignment, long-term infiltration and asset monitoring. Target, Meredith Colton. Birth name, Olivia Carlyle. I read the words 3 times before their meaning fully penetrated. Garrett had not been my husband. He had been an operative, a plant. Someone hired by the Carlyles to infiltrate my life, to get close to me, to monitor me and report back to the people who had been hunting me for decades. The folder contained transcripts of communications between Garrett and his handlers at Carlyle Defense Industries. I read through them with mounting horror. July 2018. Target has agreed to marriage. Cover identity fully established. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2 financial dependency cultivation, January 2020. Target financially dependent on joint accounts, proceeding to Phase 3 isolation protocol. Will begin systematic reduction of social connections. March 2024, Phase 3 complete. Target isolated from former friends and family support structures. Financial vulnerability at maximum. Awaiting Margaret Holloway status update before proceeding to Phase 4 extraction. August 2024, Margaret Holloway confirmed terminal. Estimated timeline 6 months. Recommend initiating financial destruction protocol to create dependency on Holloway inheritance. Target must be desperate enough to accept any lifeline when it is offered. September 2024. Financial destruction protocol complete. Joint accounts drained under gambling debt cover story. Target facing imminent eviction. Extraction team on standby, pending Holloway death confirmation. The final communication was dated just 3 weeks ago, October 2024. Holloway deceased. Inheritance notification sent to Target via Whitmore Law Firm. Target has accepted inheritance and relocated to Oak Haven property. Asset in position. Awaiting orders. I dropped the folder, my hands shaking so badly I could not hold it. My entire marriage had been a lie. Every kiss, every whispered promise, every moment of intimacy and vulnerability I had shared with the man I thought was my husband. All of it had been an operation, a carefully constructed infiltration designed to position me exactly where the Carlyles wanted me. Garrett had not abandoned me with gambling debts because he was a weak man with an addiction. He had deliberately destroyed my finances on orders from Carlyle Defense Industries, creating the desperate circumstances that would force me to accept Margaret's inheritance and walk directly into their trap. But they had not anticipated Margaret's trap. They had expected to find me alone and vulnerable in that old house, easy prey for whatever extraction team they had planned to send. Instead, they had found a vault full of evidence and a dead woman's final act of revenge. The question now was whether that revenge would be enough to stop them. I heard movement from the bed behind me and turned to find Willa sitting up rubbing her eyes. "Mom, what time is it?" "Late, honey, almost midnight. You should go back to sleep." But Willa was already looking at the papers spread across the desk, her eyes widening as she took in the photographs and documents. "Is that Dad?" I hesitated, then nodded. Willa got up and walked over, standing beside me to look at the dossier with Garrett's photograph. "What is all this?" I considered lying, considered telling her it was nothing, that she should not worry, that everything would be fine. But Willa had already been lied to her entire life, by Garrett, by me unknowingly, by a grandmother who had taken money to keep secrets. She deserved the truth. She deserved to understand what we were running from. "Your father was not who he said he was," I said slowly. "He was working for the people who are trying to find us. He was planted in my life to spy on me, to keep track of me, to make sure they could find me when they were ready." Willa stared at the photograph of Garrett for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was flat, controlled in a way that broke my heart. "I always knew something was wrong with him. The way he looked at you sometimes. Like he was watching you instead of seeing you." She paused. "I'm glad he's gone." I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight against my chest. "We're going to get through this," I whispered. "Together." Willa hugged me back, then pulled away, her expression shifting from grief to something harder, more determined. "What else is in there?" she asked, pointing at the papers on the desk. "Maybe there's something we can use." I looked at my daughter, seeing for the first time the strength that lay beneath her teenage exterior. She was not falling apart. She was not demanding to go home or pretending this was not happening. She was looking for solutions. "Help me go through it," I said. "Look for anything that mentions Protocol Omega or anything about what happens after the vault is opened." We worked together for the next 2 hours, sorting through Margaret's journals and documents with systematic efficiency. Willa proved surprisingly adept at organizing information, creating piles based on categories, and flagging passages that seemed important. It was Willa who found the critical piece. "Mom, look at this." She was holding a small notebook separate from the main journals that I had overlooked in my initial review. The cover was plain black with no dates or labels. I found it inside the back cover of the last journal. It was tucked into a hidden pocket. I took the notebook and opened it. The first page contained a single paragraph in Margaret's handwriting. Protocol Omega Activation Protocol. Upon unauthorized access to vault door, electromagnetic pulse will disable all electronic surveillance within 500-meter radius. Simultaneously encrypted data packets containing complete evidentiary documentation will be transmitted to the following recipients: Federal Bureau of Investigation Domestic Terrorism Division, Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division, Department of Justice Public Integrity Section, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Reuters International, The Guardian. Transmission will be staggered over 72-hour period to prevent coordinated suppression. First transmission immediate upon activation. Second transmission 24 hours post-activation. Third transmission 48 hours post-activation. Final transmission, 72 hours post-activation. Each transmission contains incrementally more damaging evidence building public pressure and preventing cover-up. I read the passage twice, making sure I understood what Margaret had engineered. The dead man's switch was not a single transmission. It was a cascading series of data releases, each one more damaging than the last, designed to create an unstoppable wave of exposure that the Carlyles could not possibly contain. The first transmission had already gone out when I opened the vault. The second would go out tomorrow, the third the day after, and the final, most damaging release would occur in 3 days. All we had to do was stay alive for 72 hours. "This is good, right?" Willa asked, watching my face. "The FBI is going to come for them." "Yes," I said slowly. "But the man who came to the house, the one with the gun, he's not FBI. He's private, a contractor, and he's still out there." Willa nodded, processing this information with a maturity that simultaneously impressed and saddened me. "So we need to hide until the government people do their job." "Exactly." Willa looked at the pile of fake passports I had taken from the vault. "Can we use those to get out of the country?" I picked up one of the passports, examining it closely. It was Canadian with Margaret's photograph, but a different name. Catherine Hale. There was another Canadian passport beneath it, this one with no photograph but with the name Maya Hale and a birth date that would make the bearer 12 years old. Margaret had prepared escape documents for both of us. She had anticipated that we might need to flee, and she had created the tools to make that possible. "Yes," I said, "we can use these, but we need to get to the border first." I opened the laptop I had found in the vault, a secure device with no traceable internet history, and began researching routes to Canada. The Peace Bridge crossing at Buffalo, New York was the closest option, about 6 hours of driving from our current location. But driving meant leaving a trail. Gas station cameras, toll booth records, license plate readers. I looked at the stacks of cash in the duffel bag. We would buy a used car for cash. No paperwork, no registration tied to our real names. We would drive back roads and avoid major highways. We would cross the border on foot if we had to. We would survive. 300 miles away, in a sleek office tower overlooking the Chicago skyline, Victor Carlyle stood at a floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights glitter like scattered jewels against the darkness. He was 73 years old, his hair silver but still thick, his posture still commanding despite the slight stoop that age had begun to impose. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his hands clasped behind his back bore the manicured nails of a man who had not performed manual labor in half a century. The phone on his desk buzzed. He didn't turn from the window. Report. The voice that came through the speaker was calm, professional, and devoid of emotion. Acid escaped through secondary exit before I could secure the vault. I pursued on foot but lost her in the woods. Vehicle still on site, so she's traveling by alternative means. Local resources are monitoring bus stations, train depots, and car rental agencies. Victor's jaw tightened. And the vault? Compromised, files removed, significant cash reserves taken. Electronic systems show evidence of data transmission approximately 90 seconds before I breached the door. Transmission to whom? Unknown at this time. Holloway's systems were sophisticated, military-grade encryption. I've brought in technical specialists, but it may be days before we can determine recipients. Victor turned from the window, his eyes cold. We do not have days, Mr. Harding. If Holloway sent what I think she sent, we are looking at complete exposure. Everything. The Geneva facility, the research programs. Theodore. There was a pause on the line. What are your orders? Victor walked to his desk and sat down, his movements deliberate and controlled despite the rage building in his chest. Find the asset. She has a 12-year-old daughter. Find them both. I want this contained before whatever Holloway sent reaches anyone who matters. And when I find them, Victor's expression did not change. Complete erasure, no witnesses, no evidence, no loose ends. Understood. The line went dead. Victor sat in silence for a long moment, staring at a framed photograph on his desk. It showed a young boy, perhaps 14, with dark hair and a shy smile. Theodore, his son, his heir, the boy who should have lived, the boy who had died because Margaret Holloway had stolen the resources that could have saved him. Victor had spent 36 years searching for the baby Margaret had taken. Not because he wanted a daughter. He had never wanted Olivia as a child, only as a biological resource, but because Margaret had defied him, because she had stolen from him, because she had escaped punishment for her betrayal. No one defied Victor Carlyle and lived to tell about it. No one. He picked up his phone and dialed a second number. Vivian, we have a situation. I need you at the office. 20 minutes later, Vivian Carlyle entered the office. At 71, she remained, striking her silver hair cut in a severe bob, her makeup flawless, her clothing designer and tasteful. But there was a hardness to her features that no amount of cosmetic surgery could soften a coldness in her eyes that had been there for as long as Victor had known her. "Tell me," she said, settling into a chair across from his desk. Victor explained the situation. The vault, the escape, the probable data transmission. Vivian listened without interruption, her expression unchanging. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Margaret was always smarter than we gave her credit for," she finally said. "We should have eliminated her decades ago when she first ran. We tried. She was too well hidden. Not well enough, apparently. She surfaced to die." Victor nodded. "The question now is damage control. If she sent what I think she sent, we need to be prepared for federal involvement." Vivian's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Our attorneys are the best in the country. Our political connections run deep. We have survived investigations before. Not like this. Not with documentation. Margaret kept records, Vivian, detailed records. If the FBI has those records, our attorneys and connections may not be enough." Vivian's expression hardened. "Then we need to find the girl before anyone else does. She's the key. If she's dead, if there's no living victim to testify, it becomes historical. Allegations. Unverifiable claims from a dead woman with a grudge." Victor nodded slowly. "Harding is already on it." "Good. Vivian stood smoothing her skirt. I'll speak with Senator Morrison. He owes us. If federal agencies start moving, we need advance warning. She walked to the door, then paused, looking back at her husband. Theodore would have been 50 years old this year, she said quietly. 50 years old. A CEO. A father. Everything he was meant to be, and instead he's been dead for 33 years because that woman decided she had the right to play God with our family. Victor said nothing. Vivian's eyes were hard as diamonds. Find the girl. End this. She left, closing the door softly behind her. I woke before dawn, my body stiff from sleeping in the motel room chair, my mind already racing through the logistics of our escape. Willa was still asleep, curled on her side with the blanket pulled up to her chin. She looked younger in sleep, the stress and fear temporarily erased from her features. I let her rest while I organized our supplies. The cash from Margaret's vault totaled just over $400,000. More money than I had ever seen in my life, let alone possessed. I divided it into several bundles, hiding some in the duffel bag, some in my coat pockets, some in Willa's backpack. If we were separated or robbed, we would not lose everything. The passports were more complicated. The Canadian documents Margaret had prepared were excellent forgeries, but they required photographs. Margaret's passport had her picture, but the Maya Hale passport intended for Willa was blank. I would need to find a way to add Willa's photo before we could use it at an official border crossing, or we could cross unofficially. I pulled out my phone, then stopped myself. The phone was a liability. It could be tracked, traced, used to find us. I had already removed the SIM card, but even that might not be enough. I needed to think like Margaret had thought, like someone who had spent decades evading powerful enemies. I woke Willa at 7 and we packed our few belongings in silence. I paid for 2 more nights at the motel desk, telling the clerk we might be back, creating a false trail that might buy us time. Then we walked to a used car lot on the outskirts of town. The lot was a sad collection of vehicles that had seen better decades, presided over by a heavy-set man in a stained polo shirt who introduced himself as Big Mike. "Looking for something reliable?" he asked, eyeing us with the practiced assessment of a salesman. "Something cheap," I said. "Cash, no paperwork." Big Mike's expression shifted slightly, becoming more interested. "I might have something in the back." He led us around the main lot to a smaller collection of vehicles that were clearly not for legitimate sale. Cars with no plates, no registration, no questions asked. I pointed to a 2005 Ford Taurus with faded blue paint and a dented bumper. "That one. $3,000. I did not haggle. I counted out $300 bills and handed them over. Big Mike pocketed the cash without counting it. "Keys are in it. Good luck with whatever you're running from." I didn't respond. We drove north. The Taurus handled better than it looked, its engine running smoothly despite the worn exterior. I kept to back roads, avoiding the interstate, watching the rear-view mirror for any sign of pursuit. Willa sat in the passenger seat, Margaret's notebooks open on her lap. She had taken on the role of researcher, reading through the documents and summarizing important information. "There's a lot about the company," she said, turning pages. "Carlisle Defense Industries. They do military contracts, private security, some kind of medical research. Margaret calls it the Geneva facility. It sounds really bad." "What kind of medical research?" Willa was quiet for a moment, reading. "Genetic stuff. Something about creating compatible tissue donors. She talks about growing organs." Willa's voice wavered. "Not in labs, in people." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "They were not just going to harvest me as a baby," I said slowly. "They were planning to do it to others." Willa nodded. Margaret found documents about a program in Switzerland, Off the books. They were paying families in poor countries to provide children for tissue matching. She closed the notebook, her face pale. Mom, these people are monsters. I know, honey. The FBI will stop them right when they get Margaret's files. Yes, I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. They will. We stopped for gas at a small station in rural New York, paying cash and avoiding the security cameras as best we could. I bought prepaid phones from the attached convenience store, activating them with false information. We ate fast food in the car, then continued driving. By late afternoon, we were approaching Syracuse, still several hours from the Canadian border. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear, but I did not dare stop for long. We pulled into a rest area to use the bathrooms. I told Willa to wait in the car with the doors locked while I went inside. The rest area was quiet, just a few truckers and a family with young children. I used the facilities quickly, then washed my face in the sink, trying to make myself look less like a woman on the run. When I came out, Willa was standing beside the car, staring at her phone with wide eyes. Mom, look at this. She held up the prepaid phone. She had connected to the rest area's free Wi-Fi and pulled up a news website. The headline made my heart stop. FBI raids Carlisle Defense Industries headquarters. CEO Victor Carlisle and wife Vivian sought for questioning in multiple federal investigations. I grabbed the phone, reading the article quickly. Multiple federal agencies had executed simultaneous raids on Carlisle Defense Industries facilities in Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. The raids were connected to allegations of corporate espionage, securities fraud, and what the article described as disturbing evidence of illegal medical experimentation uncovered through an anonymous data dump received by major news organizations. Victor and Vivian Carlisle were not at their Chicago residence when federal agents arrived. Their current whereabouts were unknown. It worked, Willa breathed. Margaret's thing worked. Yes, I said, scrolling through the article. But look at this. I pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. Sources close to the investigation indicate that federal agents are also seeking information about a woman identified in the leaked documents as Olivia Carlisle, allegedly the daughter of Victor and Vivian Carlisle, who was reported kidnapped as an infant in 1989. The documents suggest that the Carlisle's genetic research programs may have been connected to this child's disappearance. They were looking for me, not just the Carlisle's people, the FBI. Is that bad? Willa asked. I mean, they're the good guys, right? I do not know anymore, I admitted. I do not know who to trust. Willa was quiet for a moment, processing this. We should still go to Canada, she finally said, until we know for sure, until we know the Carlisles are really finished. I looked at my daughter, marveling at her clarity in the midst of chaos. You are right, I said. We keep moving. We got back in the car and continued north, but even as I drove, a new fear was growing in my chest. The FBI raids meant Margaret's evidence had reached its targets. The Carlisle's empire was crumbling. Justice, however, delayed, was finally coming. But Victor and Vivian Carlisle had not been arrested. They were missing, their whereabouts unknown. And somewhere out there, Mr. Harding was still hunting us. The news would not stop him. The FBI raids would not stop him. He was a professional operating outside official channels, answering only to the people who paid him. And those people wanted us dead. The sun was setting by the time we reached the outskirts of Buffalo. The city sprawled across the horizon, a maze of lights and highways that stood between us and the Canadian border. I pulled into a shopping center parking lot and killed the engine. We need a plan, I said. We cannot just drive across the border. There are cameras everywhere. If the FBI is looking for me, they will have flagged my name. Willa held up the Maya Hale passport. But this does not have my picture. How are we supposed to use it? I stared at the passport, thinking. Margaret had prepared the document, but she had died before completing it. The photograph slot was empty, the biometric chip unprogrammed. We could not use official border crossings, which meant we needed another way. I pulled out one of the prepaid phones and began searching for information about crossing the Canadian border. There were unofficial routes, places where the border was nothing more than an invisible line through dense forest or open farmland. People crossed illegally every day in both directions. It was risky. If we were caught, we would be detained, questioned, possibly separated. And if the wrong people learned where we were being held, we might never leave custody alive. But staying in the United States was riskier. I have an idea, Willa said suddenly. I looked at her. The bus, she said. We take a bus to this border, but we do not cross at the official checkpoint. We get off before the crossing, walk across through the woods, then catch another bus on the Canadian side. I considered this. It was not a perfect plan. There were 100 things that could go wrong, but it was better than anything I had come up with. The bus terminal, I said. We go tonight. The Buffalo Metropolitan Transportation Center was a cavernous building that smelled of diesel fumes and stale food. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering glow. I bought 2 tickets for the next Greyhound heading toward the Canadian border, paying cash and giving false names. The departure was in 45 minutes. We found seats near the back of the waiting area, our backs to the wall, our eyes watching the entrance. I held Willa's hand, feeling her small fingers intertwined with mine. We were so close. So close to safety, to a new life, to the freedom Margaret had spent 36 years trying to give us. All we had to do was survive the next few hours. I didn't see him coming. One moment I was watching the main entrance, scanning the faces of travelers for any sign of threat. The next moment, a familiar voice spoke from somewhere to my left. "Hello, Meredith." I whipped my head around. Standing by a vending machine partially hidden in shadow was Garrett, my ex-husband, the man who had spent years pretending to love me while reporting my every move to the people who wanted me dead. He looked terrible. His designer clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. I shoved Willa behind me, my hand diving into my coat pocket to grip the heavy flashlight I had taken from the vault. "If you take one step closer, I will scream until every cop in this building is on top of you. Please." Garrett's voice cracked, desperate and broken. "I'm not here to hurt you. I swear to God, Meredith. The Carlyles, they cut me loose. The second the FBI raided the headquarters, my handlers burned my accounts. They left me with nothing." "You have exactly what you deserve," I spat. "You destroyed our lives, you broke your daughter's heart, and you did it all for money." Garrett flinched, his eyes moving to Willa, who was peering out from behind me with an expression of pure hatred. "I was doing a job," he whispered miserably. "I know that does not make it right. I know nothing can make it right. But the cleaner the man they sent to the house in Oak Haven, he does not care that the company is burning. He is a mercenary. He works on contract, and his contract says to find you and eliminate any loose ends." "Why should I believe anything you say? Because I know where he is." Garrett's voice dropped. "Harding. That is his name. Mr. Harding. He tracked me to Buffalo because he knew I would try to find you. He is using me as bait, Meredith. He is watching me right now, waiting for you to show yourself so he can take both of us." My blood ran cold. I scanned the terminal, suddenly seeing threats everywhere. Every businessman reading a newspaper, every traveler waiting for a bus, any of them could be Harding. Any of them could be working for him. Where, I demanded. Garrett shook his head. I do not know exactly, but he is here in this building. I can feel him watching. I made a decision. You need to leave, I said. Walk out the front door, lead him away from us. And then what? He will kill me, Meredith. The second I am no longer useful, he will put a bullet in my head. That is not my problem. Garrett stared at me, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret. Genuine regret, not for getting caught, but for the choices that had led him to this moment. I know, he said quietly. I know it is not your problem. I just wanted to see Willa one more time, to tell her I am sorry. Willa stepped out from behind me, her face hard. I do not want your apology, she said. I do not want anything from you. You were never my father. You were just someone pretending to be. Garrett's face crumpled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the documents in the duffel bag, the transcripts of his reports, the clinical way he had described destroying my finances, isolating me from friends and family, preparing me for extraction like livestock being readied for slaughter. Leave, I said, now, and if you ever come near us again, I will make sure the FBI knows exactly where to find you. Garrett nodded slowly. There is a service entrance at the back of the terminal, he said, behind the maintenance closets. It leads to an alley that connects to a parking garage. If you go now while I'm walking out the front, Harding will follow me. You might have a few minutes. I didn't thank him. I grabbed Willa's hand and started moving toward the back of the terminal, weaving between rows of plastic seats and clusters of waiting passengers. Behind me, I heard Garrett's footsteps moving in the opposite direction toward the main entrance. I did not look back. The service entrance was exactly where Garrett said it would be, a heavy metal door with a push bar marked Employees Only. I hit the bar and shoved the door open, pulling Willa through into a narrow concrete corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. We ran. The corridor led to another door, this one opening into a dark alley behind the terminal. The air was cold, carrying the smell of garbage and motor oil. I could see the parking garage at the end of the alley, its concrete structure looming against the night sky. We were almost to the garage entrance when I heard footsteps behind us. Measured, controlled, professional. I turned. Mr. Harding stood at the mouth of the alley, silhouetted against the lights of the terminal. He was tall, his charcoal suit immaculate despite the chaos of the past 24 hours, his expression utterly calm. In his hand was the same suppressed handgun I had seen on the security monitors at the house. Ms. Carlyle, he said, his voice pleasant, almost conversational. You have caused a great deal of trouble. I pushed Willa behind me, shielding her with my body. The FBI has everything, I said. Killing me will not change that. No, Harding agreed. It will not. But Mr. Carlyle is not a man who accepts loose ends, and you, I am afraid, are the loosest end of all. He raised the weapon. I had no options, no weapons, no escape route. The garage was too far. The alley had no cover. We were going to die. Then Willa moved. She darted out from behind me, not toward Harding, but toward a fire alarm mounted on the wall of the alley. She pulled the handle. The alarm exploded into screaming life-red lights, flashing sirens, wailing echoing off the concrete walls with deafening intensity. Harding's eyes flickered to the alarm just for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I grabbed Willa and ran sprinting toward the parking garage as doors began opening all along the alley, maintenance workers and security guards emerging to investigate the alarm. Behind us, Harding had lowered his weapon. He could not fire with witnesses present. We plunged into the parking garage, weaving between parked cars, our footsteps echoing off concrete pillars. I found a stairwell and pulled Willa inside, climbing 2 flights to a different level, then exiting onto a floor crowded with vehicles. We crouched behind a van, gasping for breath, listening for pursuit. Silence. The fire alarm continued to wail in the distance, but there were no footsteps, no sounds of searching. "Did we lose him?" Willa whispered. "I do not know, but we cannot stay here." I pulled out the prepaid phone and searched frantically for alternative transportation. There was a taxi stand on the other side of the garage. We moved through the parked cars, staying low, checking every shadow for signs of Harding. When we reached the taxi stand, I practically threw myself into the back of the first available cab. "The bus station on Niagara Street," I said. "Fast." The driver, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes, looked at us in the rearview mirror. "You ladies okay? You look like you have seen a ghost." "We are fine," I said. "Please just drive." He nodded and pulled away from the curb. Through the rear window, I saw a figure emerge from the parking garage entrance, tall, charcoal suit, watching us drive away. The bus station on Niagara Street was smaller than the main terminal, a modest building that served local routes and Canadian border connections. I bought 2 tickets for the next bus heading north. It would take us within 5 miles of the border to a small town where the international boundary was nothing more than a river running through farmland. We boarded the bus and took seats at the very back, our duffel bag clutched between us. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched the streets of Buffalo recede through the grimy window. Somewhere out there, Harding was still searching. Somewhere out there, Victor and Vivian Carlisle were still free. But we were still alive. And in a few hours we would be in Canada, beyond the reach of the Carlisles, beyond the reach of Harding, beyond the reach of everyone who wanted us dead. Willa leaned against my shoulder, exhausted. "Do you think it is really over?" she murmured. I stroked her hair, watching the lights of the city give way to the darkness of the countryside. "Not yet," I said honestly. "But it will be. Soon." I pulled out the prepaid phone and navigated to a news website. More headlines about the Carlisle investigation, more federal agencies joining the probe, more leaked documents revealing the scope of the company's crimes. Margaret's dead man's switch was still transmitting. Tomorrow, another data dump would reach the authorities. And the day after that, another. And the day after that, the final transmission, the one Margaret had described as the most damaging of all. The Carlisle's empire was crumbling. All we had to do was survive until it finished falling. I put the phone away and closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that we might actually make it. The bus rumbled through the darkness of rural western New York, its headlights cutting pale tunnels through the fog that had settled over the countryside. Most of the passengers were asleep, their heads lolling against windows or resting on bunched-up jackets. The driver, a heavy-set woman with graying hair, kept her eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. Willa had fallen asleep against my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. I envied her ability to find rest even in the midst of chaos. Youth has that resilience, that capacity to shut down when the body demands it, regardless of what the mind is screaming. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harding's face, that expressionless mask watching us drive away from the parking garage. He had not pursued immediately, which meant he was regrouping, planning, finding another way to intercept us. Men like Harding did not give up. They adapted. The bus was scheduled to stop in a small town called Lewiston, just a few miles from the Canadian border. From there, we would need to find our own way across. The official crossing at the Peace Bridge was too risky. Cameras, databases, border agents with access to federal watch lists. Even with Margaret's forged passports, I did not trust our ability to pass through undetected. No, we would need to cross another way. I had researched the area during our brief stop at the rest area. The Niagara River formed the border between the United States and Canada, but there were places where the river narrowed, where the forests on both sides grew thick enough to provide cover. People crossed illegally every day, smugglers and refugees and desperate families seeking a better life. We would become one of those families. The bus slowed as we approached Lewiston. Through the foggy window, I could see the faint lights of a small town emerging from the darkness. A gas station, a convenience store, a cluster of houses with their porch lights glowing like earthbound stars. I gently shook Willa awake. "We're here, honey. Time to go." She blinked disoriented, then her eyes sharpened as memory returned. "Did anyone follow us?" "I do not think so, but we need to move quickly." We gathered our things, the duffel bag heavy with cash and documents, and made our way to the front of the bus. The driver glanced at us as we passed. "You ladies be careful out there. Fog's thick tonight." "Thank you," I said. "We will." We stepped off the bus into the cold night air. The fog wrapped around us, immediately muffling sounds and limiting visibility to perhaps 30 feet. The bus pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the gray murk, leaving us alone on the empty main street of Lewiston. I checked the prepaid phone. It was just after 2 in the morning. The town was completely silent. Every business closed, every house dark except for the occasional security light. We needed transportation. I had seen a used car lot on the outskirts of town as the bus approached. It would be closed at this hour, but that did not matter. I had cash, and desperate people have a way of making things happen. We walked through the fog, our footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. The town felt abandoned, like a movie set after the cameras had stopped rolling. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every distant sound made me flinch. Willa walked close beside me, her hand gripping the strap of her backpack. "Mom, I've been thinking about something." "What is it?" "The FBI. They're looking for you too, right? Not just the Carlyles." "Yes." "So even if we get to Canada, even if Harding doesn't find us, the government might still come looking." I had been thinking about the same thing. Margaret's documents had exposed me as Olivia Carlyle, the kidnapped infant, at the center of a decades-old mystery. The FBI would want to question me. The media would want to interview me. I would become a public figure, my face splashed across newspapers and television screens. A life in hiding would become impossible. "We'll deal with that when we have to," I said. "Right now our only priority is getting across the border. Everything else can wait." The used car lot appeared out of the fog like a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. Rows of aging sedans and pickup trucks sat beneath strings of faded pennant flags, their windshields beaded with moisture. There was a small office building at the back of the lot, dark and silent. I found a side door and knocked. No response. I knocked again, harder. A light flickered on inside. A moment later, the door cracked open, revealing a middle-aged man in a bathrobe, his hair disheveled, his eyes bleary with interrupted sleep. "We're closed," he said flatly. "Come back in the morning." "I need a car tonight. I'll pay cash, double the asking price." The man's eyes narrowed, suddenly more alert. "Double? Whatever you're asking for something reliable, I'll pay twice that, right now, no paperwork." He studied me for a long moment, taking in my disheveled appearance, the exhausted child beside me, the desperate edge in my voice. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come inside. Let's talk." 30 minutes later, we drove away from the lot in a 2003 Jeep Cherokee with 200,000 miles on the odometer and a heater that worked intermittently at best. I had paid $6,000 in cash, and the dealer had asked no questions. I drove north, following the GPS on the prepaid phone toward a spot I had identified on the map. A remote stretch of river where the border was nothing more than an invisible line through the water. The fog grew thicker as we left the town behind, reducing the world to the narrow cone of the Jeep's headlights. The road wound through dense forest, past darkened farmhouses and abandoned barns, deeper into the night. Willa sat in the passenger seat, watching the fog swirl past her window. "What's going to happen when we get to Canada?" she asked quietly. "We'll find somewhere safe, a small town where no one knows us. We'll start over. With new names." "Yes, new names, new lives." Willa was silent for a moment. "I don't want a new name," she said. "I like being Willa." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You'll always be Willa to me, no matter what name we use." The GPS indicated we were approaching the crossing point. I pulled the Jeep off the road onto a dirt track that led into the forest. The track was overgrown, branches scraping against the sides of the vehicle, but passable. After about half a mile, the track ended at a small clearing. Beyond the clearing, through the fog, I could see the dark shimmer of water, the Niagara River. And on the other side, Canada, freedom. I killed the engine and sat for a moment listening. The forest was quiet except for the soft drip of moisture from the trees and the distant murmur of the river. "We'll leave the car here," I said. "Take only what we can carry. The river's not wide at this point, maybe 100 yards. There's a footbridge about a quarter-mile upstream that crosses to a small island, and from the island it's a short swim to the Canadian shore." Willa nodded, her face pale but determined. We got out of the Jeep and gathered our supplies. I divided the cash between the duffel bag and Willa's backpack, making sure we each had enough to survive if we got separated. I tucked the forged passports into a waterproof pouch and hung it around my neck. Then we started walking. The forest was dense, the fog turning the trees into ghostly shapes that seemed to move at the edge of vision. I used the compass app on the phone to maintain our direction, pushing through undergrowth and climbing over fallen logs. Willa stayed close behind me, her breath visible in the cold air. We'd been walking for perhaps 15 minutes when I heard it, a sound that did not belong to the forest, the snap of a branch too loud to be an animal, too deliberate to be accidental. I froze, holding up a hand to stop Willa. We stood motionless, listening. For a long moment there was nothing, just the drip of water and the whisper of wind through bare branches. Then a voice spoke from somewhere in the fog behind us. "Ms. Carlyle, I must say you have led me on quite a chase." My blood turned to ice. Harding. He emerged from the gray murk like a specter, his charcoal suit somehow still immaculate despite the wilderness pursuit, his suppressed handgun held casually at his side. His face wore that same expression of calm professionalism I had seen on the security monitors, the look of a man doing a job he had done many times before. "How?" I whispered, my mind racing. We had been so careful. We had switched vehicles, avoided cameras, taken back roads. "Your ex-husband," Harding said, as if reading my thoughts. "When he approached you at the bus terminal, I placed a tracker in his coat. I knew he would find you eventually. Desperate men always seek out familiar faces." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "He led me right to you. Then I simply followed at a distance, waiting for the appropriate moment. Garrett, even in his attempt to warn me, he had betrayed me one final time. The FBI has everything." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Margaret's files, all of it." "Killing me won't change what's already been released." "No, it will not," Harding agreed. "The Carlyle organization is finished. Mr. and Mrs. Carlyle are currently fugitives, their assets frozen, their empire in ruins. In a matter of days, perhaps hours, they will be in federal custody." Then why are you still doing this? Harding's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, something cold and professional. Because I was paid to complete a contract, Ms. Carlyle. I do not leave contracts unfulfilled. It is bad for my reputation. He raised the weapon, the suppressor pointing directly at my chest. Mom, Willa screamed, lunging forward. Do not move, Harding said sharply, swinging the gun toward her. Either of you. Willa froze her eyes wide with terror. I stepped in front of her, shielding her with my body. She's a child, I said. Whatever contract you have, it's with me. Let her go. I'm afraid the contract specifies complete erasure. No witnesses, no loose ends. Harding's voice remained calm, almost apologetic. I take no pleasure in this, Ms. Carlyle, but business is business. He gestured with the gun. Start walking. Back toward the road. There's a vehicle waiting. I didn't move. Why, if you're going to kill us anyway, why not do it here? Because Mr. Carlyle wishes to speak with you first. He has questions about Margaret Holloway, about the files she kept, about what else might be out there that hasn't been released yet. Harding's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. He is a thorough man, Ms. Carlyle. He likes to tie up all his loose ends personally. Victor Carlyle, my biological father, the man who had created me to be harvested for spare parts. He wanted to interrogate me before having me killed. A strange, cold clarity settled over me. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about refusing to give Victor Carlyle the satisfaction of seeing me afraid of extracting whatever information he wanted before ending my life. This was about being more than the victim they had always intended me to be. Start walking. Harding repeated, his tone hardening. I reached back and took Willa's hand. Stay close to me, I whispered. No matter what happens. We began walking back through the forest, Harding following at a careful distance, his weapon trained on our backs. The fog seemed thicker now, the trees closer together, the world reduced to a gray void that swallowed everything beyond a few feet. As we walked, I squeezed Willa's hand in a specific pattern. 3 short squeezes. Pause. 2 long squeezes. Pause. 3 short squeezes, a code we had established in the motel room during those long hours of planning and preparation. A signal that meant, get ready. When I give the sign, run and don't look back. Willa squeezed back, acknowledging. I did not have a weapon. I didn't have a plan. But I had one advantage that Harding did not know about. The prepaid phone in Willa's pocket. Before we left the motel, I had programmed it with a single emergency contact, a number I had found in Margaret's files, a direct line to the FBI field office in Buffalo, specifically to the agent leading the Carlyle investigation. All Willa had to do was press and hold the number 1 key, and the phone would auto-dial, transmitting our GPS location along with the call. I just needed to give her the opportunity. We emerged from the forest onto the dirt road where we had left the Jeep. A black SUV was parked beside it, identical to the one I had seen at the house in Oak Haven. Another man stood beside the SUV, dressed in tactical gear, holding an automatic rifle. 2 of them. My heart sank. Into the vehicle, Harding said. The girl in front. You in back with me. The tactical man opened the rear door of the SUV. This was it. Once we were in that vehicle, we would have no chance. We would be driven to wherever Victor Carlyle was hiding, interrogated and killed. Our bodies would disappear, and no one would ever know what happened to us. I had to act now. As we approached the SUV, I pretended to stumble on the uneven ground, pulling Willa down with me. Mom, Willa cried, playing her part perfectly. I fell to my knees, clutching my ankle, crying out in pain. Harding stepped forward, his attention momentarily divided between me and the tactical man. "Get up," he said impatiently. "Now." "I think I twisted it," I gasped. "I can't walk." Harding sighed a sound of professional annoyance. He lowered his weapon slightly and reached down to pull me to my feet. In that moment, I screamed at Willa. "Run!" Willa did not hesitate. She sprinted into the fog, disappearing into the gray murk before Harding could react. Harding raised his weapon, aiming at the space where Willa had vanished. I launched myself at him. I was not a fighter. I had never thrown a punch in my life. But desperation gave me strength I did not know I possessed. I slammed into Harding's side, knocking his arm upward just as he fired. The suppressed shot whispered into the fog, missing Willa by inches. We crashed to the ground together, the gun flying from his grip and skittering across the dirt road. Harding recovered instantly, rolling on top of me, his hands finding my throat. His grip was like iron, cutting off my air supply with practiced efficiency. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. The tactical man was running toward us, his rifle raised, but he could not fire without risking hitting Harding. This is how I die, I thought. Strangled on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere while my daughter runs alone through the fog. At least she would have a chance. At least she might escape. Then a gunshot split the night. Not the whispered cough of a suppressed weapon, but the full thunderous roar of an unsuppressed firearm. Harding's body jerked, his grip on my throat loosening. Blood blossomed on his shoulder, staining his charcoal suit crimson. Another shot. Another. The tactical man stumbled backward, clutching his chest, then collapsed to the ground. Harding rolled off me, reaching for his fallen weapon with his uninjured arm. A figure emerged from the fog. For a moment, I thought it was FBI. I thought rescue had arrived. Then I saw his face. Garrett. He was holding a pistol I didn't recognize, his hands shaking, his face pale with terror, but his aim was steady as he pointed the weapon at Harding. "Don't move," Garrett said, his voice cracking. "Don't even think about it." Harding froze his hand inches from his gun. "Mr. Whitfield," Harding said, his voice tight with pain. "I should have eliminated you when I had the chance." "Yeah," Garrett said. "You should have." I struggled to my feet, my throat burning, my vision still blurred. "Garrett, what?" "I followed you from Buffalo," he said, not taking his eyes off Harding. "I knew he would find you. I knew he would try to take you." He swallowed hard. "I couldn't let that happen, not after everything I did to you." "You're a fool," Harding said. "The Carlyles will hunt you for the rest of your miserable life." "The Carlyles are finished," Garrett replied. "I watched the news. FBI raids, federal indictments. Victor and Vivian are running for their lives." He smiled, but there was no joy in it. "There's no one left to pay you, Harding. No one left to protect you. You're just a loose end now, just like me." Harding's eyes flickered, calculating odds, assessing options. "I can make you rich," he said. "I have money, hidden accounts, enough for all of us to disappear." "I don't want your money," Garrett said. "I want to do one right thing in my miserable life." He looked at me. "Take Willa. Get across the border. There's a footbridge about a quarter-mile upstream. The Canadian side is unmonitored. You can make it if you go now." "Garrett, go," he shouted. "Before more of them show up, I'll hold him here." I stared at the man who had destroyed my life. The man who had married me under false pretenses, reported my every movement to people who wanted me dead, deliberately bankrupted my family to make me desperate enough to walk into a trap. And now he was giving us a chance to escape. "Why?" I asked. Garrett's eyes glistened. "Because Willa called me Dad for 6 years. Because I taught her to ride a bike and helped her with her homework and tucked her in at night. And even though it was all supposed to be an act, even though I was supposed to be pretending, his voice broke. I wasn't pretending about loving her, Meredith. I wasn't pretending about that. Tears streamed down my face. "Find her," Garrett said. "Keep her safe. Give her the life she deserves." I turned and ran into the fog, following the path Willa had taken. Behind me, I heard Garrett's voice, cold and hard. "Now, Mr. Harding, let's discuss your retirement options." I found Willa huddled behind a fallen tree about 200 yards into the forest. She was clutching the prepaid phone tears streaming down her face. "I called," she said when she saw me. "I pressed the button like you showed me. The FBI, they're coming. They said to stay on the line, but I heard the shots and I thought..." I pulled her into my arms, holding her so tight I could feel her heart pounding against my chest. "I'm okay, honey. I'm okay." "The bad man..." Garrett stopped him. "He saved us." Willa pulled back, her eyes wide. "Dad?" I nodded. "He's buying us time. We need to go right now." We ran through the forest, following the sound of the river. The fog was beginning to thin, the first gray light of dawn seeping through the trees. I could hear the rush of water growing louder with each step. The footbridge appeared through the mist, a narrow wooden structure spanning the river to a small island in the middle. It looked ancient, the planks weathered and warped, but it was still standing. We crossed quickly, the boards creaking under our weight. The river churned below us, dark and cold. On the island, we paused to catch our breath. The Canadian shore was visible through the thinning fog, maybe 50 yards away. The water between looked calm, but I knew it would be freezing. "Can you swim that far?" I asked Willa. She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I was on the swim team, remember, before we moved." "Stay close to me. If you get tired, grab onto my back." We waded into the river. The cold hit me like a physical blow, driving the breath from my lungs. The water was so cold it burned every nerve in my body, screaming at me to turn back. I pushed forward. Willa gasped beside me, but kept moving her arms, cutting through the water with the trained efficiency of a competitive swimmer. We were halfway across when I heard the sound. Helicopter rotors. I looked up. A helicopter was descending through the fog, its searchlight cutting through the gray murk. But it was not a military helicopter or a private aircraft. The letters on its side were clearly visible in the growing light. FBI, they were here. I swam harder, pulling Willa along my muscles, screaming in protest. The Canadian shore was getting closer. 40 yards, 30, 20. My feet touched bottom. We staggered out of the river onto Canadian soil, collapsing on the rocky shore, gasping for breath, shivering uncontrollably. Behind us on the American side, I could see vehicles arriving at the spot where we had left the Jeep, SUVs with flashing lights, federal agents in tactical gear, and in the distance the sound of more gunshots, then silence. I did not know if Garrett was alive or dead. I did not know if I would ever find out. But we were in Canada. We were free. 6 months later, I stood on the rocky shore of a small town in Nova Scotia, watching the Atlantic Ocean roll toward me in endless gray waves. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed, and the sky was the particular shade of pearl that seems to exist only in coastal New England and the maritime provinces. Willa was at school, attending classes under the name Maya Hale, slowly building a new life with new friends who knew nothing about the dramatic circumstances that had brought us here. She was doing well, better than I had any right to hope. Children are resilient in ways that adults forget. I went by Catherine Hale now. It was the name on the passport Margaret had prepared for me, and it had become as familiar as my original name over the months we had spent building our new identity. We lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, purchased with cash from Margaret's vault. I worked part-time at a local bookstore, earning just enough to explain our modest lifestyle without drawing attention. It was a quiet life, a peaceful life, a life I never could have imagined during those desperate days of flight and fear. The Carlyle empire had collapsed completely. I had followed the news obsessively in the weeks after our escape, watching as Margaret's dead man's switch delivered its final payload. The third data dump had included evidence of the Geneva facility, the illegal medical research program where children from impoverished countries had been used as unwitting tissue donors. The fourth and final transmission had contained Victor Carlyle's personal correspondence, including explicit discussions of the plan to harvest my organs as an infant. The public reaction had been volcanic. Victor Carlyle had been captured 3 weeks after our escape, found hiding in a private compound in Costa Rica. He was currently awaiting trial on 37 federal counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, and violations of international medical ethics laws. The legal experts predicted he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Vivian Carlyle had never made it to trial. She had been found dead in her cell 6 weeks after her arrest, having somehow obtained a fatal dose of barbiturates. The official ruling was suicide, though there were whispers that she had been helped along by someone who wanted to ensure she never testified. I did not mourn her. Garrett had survived his confrontation with Harding, though just barely. 2 bullets had struck him, one in the shoulder and one in the leg. The FBI had arrived in time to arrest Harding and provide emergency medical care to Garrett, who was now in federal custody himself, cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. I had received a letter from him 2 months ago, forwarded through a series of intermediaries to protect my location. It was short, just a few paragraphs apologizing for what he had done and thanking me for allowing him the chance to do one right thing at the end. I had not responded. I didn't know if I would ever respond. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, but today was not a day for dwelling on wounds. Today was the anniversary of Margaret Holloway's death. I walked along the shore until I reached a small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ocean. The graves here were old, dating back centuries to the earliest European settlers in Nova Scotia. Weathered headstones leaned at angles, their inscriptions worn smooth by salt wind and time. Near the back of the cemetery, beneath the branches of a towering oak tree, was a newer grave. Margaret Holloway, 1952 to 2024. She saved what others would have destroyed. I had arranged for Margaret's remains to be moved here from Pennsylvania, wanting her to rest in a place of peace and beauty rather than the lonely plot beside the house in Oak Haven. It had taken months of paperwork and considerable expense, but it felt right. She deserved to be somewhere beautiful. I knelt before the headstone and placed a bouquet of wildflowers against the cold stone. "I brought you something," I said softly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a letter I had written the night before, pouring out everything I had wanted to say, but never had the chance. "Dear Margaret, I never knew you. We never met, never spoke, never shared a single moment together. And yet you shaped my entire life. You saved me before I was old enough to remember being saved. You sacrificed everything, your career, your identity, your safety to protect a baby you had no biological connection to. You spent 36 years in hiding, watching from a distance, making sure I was safe. I know now why you did it. I read your journals. I understand what Victor and Vivian Carlyle intended for me, the horror you prevented by taking me away. You were not my mother. You were not my aunt. But you were my guardian angel, watching over me from the shadows, preparing for the day when the truth would finally come out. I'm sorry you never got to see how it ended. I am sorry you died alone in that old house, knowing that the trap you had built would be sprung, but not knowing if it would work. It worked, Margaret. It worked. Victor Carlyle will spend the rest of his life in prison. Carlyle Defense Industries has been dismantled, its crimes exposed to the world. The children who were hurt by their research programs have been identified and are receiving help. The families have been compensated. Justice has been served, and I am free. I live in a beautiful place now by the ocean where the air is clean and the people are kind. Willa is thriving, building a life that will be defined by her own choices rather than the shadows of the past. Every morning I wake up and remember that I am alive because of you. Every night I go to sleep grateful for the sacrifice you made. I will never be able to repay what you did for me, but I can honor it. I can live the life you fought to give me. I can raise Willa to be strong and kind and brave. I can pass on the legacy of courage and sacrifice that you demonstrated. You called me the loosest end in your final letter. You apologized for using me as bait. I forgive you. You did what you had to do to ensure that the Carlyles faced justice. You knew that your evidence, however damning, might be buried or discredited without a living victim to corroborate it. You needed me to survive long enough to validate your claims. It was a gamble. A desperate last-ditch gamble by a dying woman who had run out of options. But it worked. And because it worked, Victor Carlyle's crimes will never be forgotten. The world knows what he did. The world knows what he planned to do to me. The world knows that there are monsters hiding behind boardroom tables and corporate logos, and that sometimes it takes a monster hunter to bring them down. You were that monster hunter, Margaret. You were the one who refused to look away, who refused to follow orders, who refused to let an innocent child be sacrificed on the altar of wealth and power. I wish I could have known you. I wish I could have thanked you in person. I wish you could have met Willa, could have seen the amazing young woman she is becoming. But since I cannot have those things, I will settle for this. Thank you, Margaret Holloway. Thank you for my life. I will make it count. With love and eternal gratitude, Olivia Carlyle. I tucked the letter beneath the flowers and stood brushing dirt from my knees. The wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the ocean and the distant cry of seabirds. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the presence of the woman who had saved my life, the woman I had never known, but who had known me better than anyone. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Willa was walking up the hill, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, her dark hair blowing in the wind. She must have gotten out early, must have known where I would be today. She came to stand beside me, looking down at Margaret's grave. "I brought something too," she said. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small framed photograph. It was a picture of me and her taken on the beach a few weeks ago, both of us smiling, the ocean stretching out behind us. "I thought she might want to see us," Willa said, "to see that we're okay." I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I think she would like that very much." Willa placed the photograph beside my flowers, arranging it carefully against the headstone. We stood together in silence, two survivors paying tribute to the woman who had made their survival possible. "Mom," Willa said finally. "Yes, honey. Do you think she's at peace now, Margaret?" I considered the question, thinking about everything I had learned about Margaret Holloway over the past 6 months. A woman of violence and shadows who had found redemption in an act of mercy. A woman who had spent decades preparing for a final confrontation she knew she would not live to see. "Yes," I said. "I think she is." Willa nodded slowly. "Good. She deserves to be at peace." We stood there a while longer, the wind carrying our silence across the graves of the forgotten dead. Then Willa took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine the same way they had during our desperate flight through the Pennsylvania woods, our terrified swim across the Niagara River. "Let's go home, Mom." I looked at my daughter, seeing in her face the strength and resilience that had carried us through the darkest chapter of our lives. "Yes," I said, "let's go home." We walked down the hill together, leaving Margaret Holloway to her eternal rest. The cottage was warm when we arrived, the fire I had built that morning still glowing in the hearth. The smell of the vegetable soup I had prepared for dinner filled the small space, mixing with the ever-present scent of salt air that permeated everything in this coastal town. Willa settled at the kitchen table to do her homework, while I stirred the soup and thought about the journey that had brought us here. A year ago, I had been a woman drowning in debt and despair, abandoned by a husband. I thought I knew, facing eviction from a life that was already falling apart. I had been Meredith Colton, a nobody, a failure, a single mother with no prospects and no hope. Now I was Catherine Hale, a woman with a new name and a new life, living in a cottage by the sea, raising a daughter who had proven herself braver and stronger than I ever could have imagined. And beneath that name, I was still Olivia Carlyle, the stolen child whose existence had brought down a criminal empire. I was all of these women and none of them. I was simply a survivor. The soup was ready. I ladled it into bowls and brought them to the table, sitting across from Willa as she set aside her textbooks. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that exists between people who have been through fire together and emerged on the other side. When we finished, Willa helped me wash the dishes, then retreated to her room to finish her homework. I sat by the fire, watching the flames dance, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. The FBI investigation was ongoing. There would likely be more revelations, more trials, more media attention. At some point, I might have to emerge from hiding to testify, to put a human face on the crimes that Margaret's documents had exposed. When that day came, I would be ready. But for now, I was content to live quietly, to rebuild, to heal. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the Atlantic Ocean continued its eternal conversation with the shore. And in a small cottage in Nova Scotia, a mother and daughter who had lost everything found something more precious than they had ever known. They found home. The next morning, I woke early before Willa and walked down to the shore to watch the sunrise. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, the horizon painted in shades of pink and gold as the sun crept above the edge of the world. The ocean was calm, its surface reflecting the colors above like a vast mirror. I thought about the inheritance that had started this journey. A crumbling house in Pennsylvania left to me by a woman I had never met. I had thought it was a gift. Then I had thought it was a trap. Now I understood it was both. Margaret Holloway had known exactly what she was doing when she made me her heir. She had known that the house, the vault, the evidence within would draw out the Carlyles, would force a confrontation that had been decades in the making. She had used me as bait, yes, but she had also given me the tools to survive. The money, the passports, the information that had allowed me to understand what I was running from and why. In the end, the inheritance was not the house or the cash or the documents. The inheritance was freedom. The freedom to live without fear. The freedom to raise my daughter without looking over my shoulder. The freedom to be whoever I wanted to be. That was Margaret Holloway's true gift, and I would spend the rest of my life honoring it. I stood on the shore until the sun was fully above the horizon, its light warming my face. Then I turned and walked back to the cottage where Willa was waiting for me with breakfast already on the table. "I made pancakes," she said, smiling. They look perfect, honey. We sat down to eat together, mother and daughter survivors family. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm, wave after wave washing against the shore. And in the quiet moments between bites, between words, between breaths, I found something I had not felt in longer than I could remember: peace.